Hi, Stephen, over to you.
Good morning and welcome everyone to our launch of the Financial and Professional Services Toolkit. Thank you for taking the time to join. We're really excited about this. As I my name is Stephen Cooper from the Social Mobility Commission. A lot of work has gone into the creation of this toolkit, which really takes all the best practice that exists in our sector and applies that to a toolkit for others to use to either improve what they are doing around social mobility or to help others think about it maybe for the first time. I would just say a lot of contributions have been made to this by many firms, many organisations and many individuals. So thank you for all your hard work in putting this together. It really is, I think, an impressive collaboration by many people. We've got a fantastic agenda lined up. We're going to start off in a moment. I'm going to ask my fellow co-chair, Sandra Wallace, for her views on social mobility, why it matters. She's very elegant and eloquent in pulling that together. Then we're going to hand over to the Right Honourable Justine Greening, founder of the Social Mobility Pledge. I've spoken to Justine a few times and she has a real passion around social mobility, so looking forward to that. Followed by some research that was done by both the City of London Corporation and the Bridge Group. So we'll hear about the research as to how and why people get on or don't, as the case may be, from different backgrounds in the financial services sector. And then we're going to move on to the Social Mobility Foundation and their Employers Index, led by Sarah Atkinson, who's Chief Executive of the Social Mobility Foundation. And then we're going to go on to a Q&A panel at the end. So quite an exciting hour or two. I'm going to hand over now to Sandra. Sandra, can you, I hear you talk about this all the time and you've got a great personal story and you're very, say, eloquent in talking about this, but what is social mobility? And from your point of view, why does it matter?
Thanks, Steve, and appreciate it. And again, let me add my welcome to everybody that's joined today and made a contribution to this. I really do remember when we first launched the commission, a lot of the people that came up to us and spoke to us about social mobility. First of all, there was a concept that there's definitely different views about what it all meant, but there was also how do we track it? How do we understand? How can we actually use in our organisation, make a difference? And that is absolutely what we're trying to do and what this toolkit is trying to do. But one of the fundamental things really is to keep it simple, and that's what there's lots of definitions. There's lots of people that look at what you can use to track social mobility or say what do we mean by social mobility. One of the things the Commission really wanted to do was keep it simple. And so what is social mobility for us, and the thing that we really want to make clear is that it's about ensuring your background doesn't determine your future. And what we've tried to do is track that and make the link between a person's income and the occupation or income of their parents. But essentially, it's about making sure people have the opportunity to have a future that is not just simply determined by their past or their background, etc. So that's essentially what we've tried to say social mobility is. And I know, again, if you just move on, there's lots of people on this in this call today that really get why we exist and what we're here for and the importance of this agenda. But as a commission, we were formed because at the time the coalition government felt that this was something that needed specific attention, and setting up the commission asked us as an independent arm's length body, as we say, to advocate for social mobility and really monitor its progress and really help ministers in this space tackle this agenda. So what we have, the commissioners are a body of people that are not apolitical in terms of their roles, all have alternative careers or professions, but we were very keen not only in having that monitoring function, but also making sure we have the delivery and the sort of practical tools that could be used, so we can create those paths of opportunities that are set out there. So if you just move on. This is where we are at the moment. So I think it's fair to say it's clear that there's work to do. We rank 21st on the World Economic Forum's Index of Social Mobility. This is we're faring poorly against our other G7 counterparts, and it means that we have to there has to be a significant investment, not only by government, but I think us as employers, in trying to get to a better position. And so this slide really just gives you a snapshot of the things we've got to deal with. Now, we want to really focus on sectors, because as we looked at a toolkit, a lot of people said, well, we're all slightly different, we all have different drivers, we all recruit in different ways. And so we started with this sector, the financial and professional services sector, for this reason, as set out on these slides. The profession is heavily dominated by professional roles, and those roles are heavily dominated by people from more privileged backgrounds, and the people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds still. And I think we have made a big headway in the profession and in the sector, but it's still pretty much dominated by people that have come from privileged background and not from the working backgrounds like myself and the Right Honourable Justin Greening, for example, that will be talking after me. So this is a sector that is skewed towards professional roles, which is a very important sector and very important to the UK economy, but is still not seeing the right proportions of people from working class backgrounds in those sectors. This looks at probably our hiring. This shows the representation, and just to make one other point, that the hiring practices that we still do tend to favour those that go to what we might traditionally say are the right schools or the right universities, and really we have to say that the position isn't fit for purpose. So where we work as a region is also shown to be overrepresented in London and the South East. This is a problem for socioeconomic diversity. We do outreach activities aimed at schools. We know there's further education colleges and institutions that really do need more attention and really do need more insight from us and intervention by us as a profession in order to see the statistics that we've just seen on the previous slides change. Because I think, I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but you can see the heavy proportion of the sector is coming from that region of the country. And as I sit in here in Birmingham, this is something that particularly resonates with me, and taking a decision to stay in and by any means the Midlands has a very good representation as well, but still, you know, nothing like the density that we see in London and the South East. So this is something again that I think we need to look at. So this slide is really, again, I'm not going to dwell too much because I'm keen to hear from our speakers, and Nick Miller from the Bridge Group will cover this in more detail. But this slide tells us really our culture is not inclusive. We have structures that still benefit some groups more than others, and access to training is still pretty much skewed towards people in the higher professional roles, and there's a greater need for apprenticeships. So it's a real focus here. It's about who gets on, where you come from is determining really where you get on, and rather than the ability for us to say everyone, irrespective of their social background, will get on. This slide, sorry, if we could just go back to the previous slide. I think what's really key is that sort of 25% statistic. Boosting socioeconomic diversity at junior levels will not automatically lead to greater diversity at the top. Employees from lower socioeconomic backgrounds take 25% longer to progress through grades with no link found to job performance. The reason I think that's important, and I wanted to just stress that, is that I think the sector has done a lot of hard work in increasing entry into the profession and in looking at recruitment practices and targeting graduates, etc. But we've absolutely still got the situation where the inclusive piece, the progression in once they're in the organisation, it still has somewhat a significant amount of work to do. So even if you think, right, I think if I look at our employers, we're in a good space on recruitment, this is still an area that needs continuing focus. Sorry, thank you. Lindsay, if you could just go on now. And again, I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone on this call that diverse teams are successful teams. It's something that I hope, if your organisation is still in a place where you need some convincing to do, though, that this slide will help in that respect. This slide really is emphasising that our business operations, our branding, our well-being, our future-proofing can all be improved by a more diverse workforce. Inclusive teams, as it says there, makes better business decisions 87% of the time and twice as fast, delivering 60% better results. And this is proven statistics in diverse workplaces. And I can tell you from my own workplace and working in an executive team, that team being a diverse team and an inclusive team, that we bond, we gel, we challenge, and we've seen business performance improve year on year. And I don't think that's by just by the fact that we're lawyers and this is the way things go. I genuinely believe that it comes about because we have a diverse set of people in that room internationally, but also culturally and socio-economic backgrounds. So it shouldn't be something that we need to say. It shouldn't be the only reason we do it. We should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. But there is evidence to say this works as well. And we can make a difference. And again, highlighting here some firms and some of the activities, and thanks again to all the sponsors that have supported us in this. And you can know how passionately I feel about this subject when my first quote here is from a rival law firm. So that just goes to show how passionately I feel about this agenda and how we all work in this space together. Liam's story is really powerful. He's someone that's taken part and supported us, but the Freshfields programme, set up to address underrepresentation of Black men from less socially mobile backgrounds, is really something that he thinks has helped him progress, and also stopping people falling through the gaps that he knows and sees every day that haven't had the same opportunities. And all of the examples here, we can see that they're all firms that are determined to make a difference in this space. And understand the importance of this sector. And these are, we're all part of market leading practices. We all want to be the best businesses. We all want to be the top of our rankings. And absolutely, this will make the difference in our professions, in our sectors, in our spaces, if we embrace this agenda. Thank you. So, actions that you were taking. We know there's some great work that's going on in various places, and again, I just wanted to highlight that some of the programs that are already taking place in some of the firms that have supported us through this process and have engaged with us to get to the place that we are today, launching this amazing toolkit. So again, I'm not going to read out the slides, but as you can see, there's an impact on geography. If we look at where we're recruiting from, if we have outreach programs that are interactive, that are smart, that are inclusive, that we're hiring programs, removing academic criteria, if we have an apprenticeship program that really pushes the boundaries, then all of these things are going to make a difference. So I don't want by any means wants to hammer the industry or say we're not doing the right things. There's so many good examples of doing the right things, and this is about this toolkit is about helping you to progress that, but also helping those companies that are not in the space yet and really need to know what further action they can take. We've been working together to get to where we are today. So I just want to make clear, I suppose, that this toolkit isn't just the Social Mobility Commission working with a few people to get to this toolkit. We've co-created with over 100 leading employers in this space. We've worked across 7 months and we've consulted extensively in order to get to the toolkit that we've got now. We've worked with membership bodies and regulatory bodies to support, and those dialogues will be ongoing because we envisage that we will finesse and improve this product if there's things that we're missing, even after all this consultation. We've taken on board recommendations and interventions, over 20,000 words there, and we've commissioned our own research in order to really pull together what we're seeking to do. We've also collaborated to create this launch with advice as well that will support us in this program. I'm just checking everyone can still hear me, but I'm sure they can. So it was really important that I think everyone on this call, and as you go out and talk to other firms that you do business with and you talk to other colleagues, that they understand the work and the effort that has gone into this, and that it's your profession, it's our profession that has actually led the way in pulling this toolkit together. This is not something that we've just dreamt up. We've done it with the aim of making sure we had the soundings and all the input from the sector to get here. So it's been developed by you, and these are some of the contributors that are just highlighted in this slide. And what we're seeking to do with this toolkit is deal with the outreach, for hiring, right through to advocacy, leadership, etc. So some examples of guidelines. I'm not going to give you lots of information about the toolkit or run through. We want you to explore it and go through it yourself. But some examples of our guidelines are just set out here to give you a bit of a taster of what the toolkit really tries to deliver on. It's not just about, it's about data tracking. It's about getting views. It's about then showing you how you can have inclusive workforces, how you can ask some of those questions, how you can track your own data. So I hope you'll find this product informative. I hope you'll really see the benefit, and I hope you appreciate not only the effort that's gone into it, but that it's the effort that has been gone into has been as a result of your input. And we can't thank you enough for the effort that you've made in supporting us on this toolkit. Okay. So I think that's me. I'm going to be handing over to Justine Greening, the Right Honourable Justine Greening, I should say. And I say that Justine is a friend of the Commission and to many of you on this call. I know she needs no introduction, but for those that don't know Justine, her background was very important to me, because the first time I met Justine, I was invited to a meeting to see her, and I thought you do your research and who you're going to meet, and here it comes with your unconscious bias, because I made the very assumption she'd have gone to a private school and she'd have gone through the top universities and she would have done all the things that you would expect. But Justine was born in Rotherham and attended the Oakwood Comprehensive School and Southampton University. After a career in accountancy, she was elected to Parliament in 2005 and joined the Cabinet in 2011. And in 2016, Justine became the first comprehensively educated Education Secretary. I mean, staggering, with a flagship policy of establishing opportunity areas. And some of those areas the Commission have visited and really see the benefits and really want to see those expanded. That's another plug. And we can see how that has helped social mobility. In 2018, Justine founded the Social Mobility Pledge, which is an organisation dedicated to improving the links between talent and opportunity in working with employers and educators. And I've never seen anyone more committed to this agenda and talking about this agenda on so many occasions. So I'd like to welcome Justine to just talk about the toolkit and just give us a few words on her thoughts on this agenda. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And let me just say, first of all, I remember that first meeting that we had, and I seem to think however long it was meant to be in my diary, it ended up being a lot longer than that. And my team kept coming in to try to get us to finish. But it was such a great discussion. And I think it really was one of those meetings that brought alive to me just how much goodwill there is in your profession to really get serious change on the ground. But also I discovered, how much best practice there is already there that I think very much challenges a wider sector on what's possible. And I did want to, of course, start by, just saying how much the leadership that you and Stephen are showing on this through the work on the panel, the Commission matters so much. And I thought maybe just in my brief comments, I would almost set a wider context of where we are today on levelling up. And then I think where the sector fits into this, and then the toolkit. I think on the wider context today, we had a government with a levelling up agenda before COVID hit. And as you set out in your slides so well, Sandra, many of the issues we're talking about in relation to social mobility are ingrained, and they have been a part of our country really for the long term. But I think what we've seen over 2020 is it's been a watershed year for levelling up in many respects, but in a bad way, because it's taken all of those inequalities and then managed to make them bigger. And so as we go into 2021, I think the whole country is really grappling with this challenge of how we actually deliver on levelling up Britain, when actually the challenge of it has become even more difficult still. And I think that means two things. First of all, you set out this focus on geography, which is quite right. And actually we're sat in a city that in many respects is going to be harder hit the most on levelling up. The claimant count, interestingly, for unemployment benefits in London over the course of COVID, just to the end of October, rose by a shocking 171%, so practically doubled. And I think it underlines the fact that whilst often levelling up is seen as a northern agenda, and I know all about that because I'm originally from the north, as Sandra said, actually we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in London itself, we really need a levelling up plan for that. And the reason I say that is also because, as you set out, many of the businesses who are on the call today are fundamentally based here. So you're the ones that can really have a big impact. And I think what we shouldn't lose sight of is that this is a city in particular that has, of course, got an economy almost of two halves. One half, the retail, the hospitality, the culture, the tourism, the service sector. The other half, the city, the fact it's the hub of Britain's economy, and it's driven and supported by many of you and your businesses, the professional services, the financial services, that really the hallmark of the London economy. I think the levelling up challenge we've got on our hands, more locally, is that sector of the economy that was always the most open to everyone and anyone, which was retail, hospitality, that's the bit that is losing the opportunities. And that's why we're seeing our claimant count here significantly increase and the opportunities reduce. Of course, the bit that's left is your bit. Yet your bit is often the bit that has been more closed. And as Sandra said, the reason this is a sector toolkit focused on this sector is because, in spite of a huge amount of effort over now quite a long period of time, it still remains too closed to a lot of people who are growing up right on its doorstep. And of course, Sandra really eloquently talked about diversity and inclusion. This is a diverse city. That diversity is right here. And so what we're talking about is how companies can change to be able to access that diversity and then progress it through. So it's never been more important. And I think the politics of this only become more intense next year. It's the 10th anniversary since the beginning of the Davis Commission that then became the Hampton-Alexander Commission. In February, we'll see that final report from the Hampton-Alexander Commission that will set out how much progress has been made on gender. And although there's a long way to go, it really shows how much we can shift things if we have a concerted effort, and one that is often led, in that case, and gender, also by business and industry. But I do think it also then means we will look at this wider diversity challenge. So I think whether it's BAME or social mobility more widely, I think the focus really will come on to this bigger picture, if you like, that perhaps gender was part of. And I think where the toolkit fits in is it's basically a very comprehensive set of very practical measures to say this is how you do it. And in a sense, it's setting, if you like, almost minimum standards, I think, for what people will expect of businesses in this sector and perhaps businesses more generally. And I think, I mean, obviously, I mean, it probably doesn't quite go without saying the Social Mobility Commission's taxpayer funded. And I think taxpayers really will now want to see this kind of toolkit properly adopted, I think, by companies in the sector. And, you know, Sandra and Stephen have set out, there are so many companies in this sector who are already doing so much. And so it's very much about saying it's now time for those laggards, I think, to catch up. And I think that a lot of this work has been done voluntarily, and it really has shown who the leaders on this are. But actually, my gut instinct politically is companies aren't going to be asked to get better forever. And I think it's really important, therefore, that a toolkit like this is used by businesses to make sure that they can really get ahead of the curve. And through the Social Mobility Pledge, I think what we've uncovered is there's a huge amount of goodwill and appetite and best practice out there, innovation and ideas of how to bring a toolkit like this alive. I'm sorry I can't stay for the Q&A. I'm happy to follow up with any of the people involved in this and the businesses afterwards to answer any questions. But there's a wealth of best practice out there. And I saw a huge amount of leadership from businesses that I spoke to through the pledge. It's one of the reasons I ended up talking to both Sandra and Stephen, because they are some of these leaders that I think other businesses and business leaders can really learn from. But using this toolkit really is the beginning of a journey that we want to see companies go on. And I think that it's part of how businesses can build up their armory of what they do. And it's part of, I think, how leaders who perhaps have not taken their companies on this agenda as far as leaders like Stephen and Sandra have, can really perhaps have a sense of how to do this well in a way that helps them get up a learning curve. I'll just, in a sense, finish by saying, you know, we've been here before. I talked about gender and the progress we've seen. Actually, you know, 15, 20 years ago, there were business leaders saying, well, we just don't have the pipeline. It's not easy to find the right kind of women to come into our organization who thrive. We've really learned a lot going through all of that progress, not just in terms of recruitment, but crucially also in terms of progression. And I think it's now time to draw on this for this wider good of driving social mobility. And I think that the cultural shift that it can really engender in business more broadly is one that we absolutely should be running towards. And of course, you know, for me, this matters with this sector because I started my career in professional services. I trained as an accountant at what's now Pricewaterhouse, PwC. And I think there's so much best practice there. It's absolutely vital that it now does get spread further and in a sense becomes more systemic in terms of how the sector uses it. And I know that within politics and government, there'll continue to be quite a big focus on this sector as well. Obviously, you are many of those consultants and experts that are drawn on by government, and as government puts levelling up at the heart of its agenda, then it's never been more important for all sorts of reasons, I think, for the sector to be able to really, really show that leadership. But congratulations on getting this launch done and pulling together this work. I think this toolkit's a real step forward. So well done and good luck with making sure that it gets used fully.
Thank you very much, Justine, and thank you. I know you can't stay for the Q&A, but really do appreciate you taking the time out to really come and share your thoughts. Again, it's fantastic the work you're doing, and please continue because it really does help us keep the agenda on the forefront of the political world. So thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm now moving on to Catherine McGuinness, another amazing woman that I've met and worked with at the City of London Corporation to again share a few words with her thoughts on the Commission. And for those that you don't know, Catherine, she is chair of policy at the City of London Corporation, and her work on education, chairing its Education Board and the City of London Academies Trust. With academies and as parents and as a desire to be socially useful, one of Catherine's proudest achievements was when the City of London Academies Trust was named by social mobility charity Sutton Trust as the UK's best academy sponsor for empowering pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds to perform above the national average. It's an amazing performance and effort, and Catherine, I know you feel passionately about this agenda too, so if I could hand over to Catherine.
Great, thank you very much for that introduction, Sandra, and I'm really pleased to be here this morning. And I actually want to start by thanking Justine not only for what she's doing in this area, but also for what you've just said, Justine, about the challenges that London faces too, because they're often overlooked, and London is facing particular challenges in the aftermath of COVID, very much a tale of two cities. We've produced our own report looking at, with the sector at some of the answers, some of the potential answers to this, some of the challenges we need to meet. London Recharged, I'll put a link in the chat in a second. One of the recommendations of that is that we should work for a London which is inclusive as well as diverse, that the workforce should be inclusive as well as diverse, with opening its opportunities to everyone. And I think that really fits with the theme of this morning. And I'm really pleased to be here to welcome this fantastic initiative. And I should have started by saying, for those who don't understand what a policy chair is, I am effectively the political leader of the organisation which looks after the Square Mile itself. It's the local authority, but also works very closely with the financial and professional services sector, which is called the City, although it's a UK-wide sector. Here in the City, we boast one of the most diverse workforces in the world, and we really do welcome skills and talent from around the globe. It's part of why London is a leading global financial centre. It hosts a global sector, and it hosts international talent to service that. And it is central to our success that we bring new ideas, fresh perspectives, and high quality skills. But it's not clear, however, that particularly when we're looking at our UK workforce, it's really not clear that we are using all the skills that we could. It's great that, as Sandra has said, we know that many more people are now able to access jobs within the financial and professional services sector. A lot of work has gone into that in recent years, through greater outreach and fairer recruitment practices. Clearly a lot more to do, but it's great to see the progress that's happened there. But we do also know that many within the sector, even though they get into it, may face barriers to progression. It's one thing getting in, it's another thing getting on. And you'll shortly be hearing from Nick from Bridge Group, with whom we recently published a report looking at socio-economic diversity in financial services. And this, as you'll hear, demonstrates that there really are ongoing issues around retention and progression. And I'm grateful to Sandra for pulling out the City of London Academies Trust. I am very proud that we managed for 2 years running to be named the UK's best academy sponsor for empowering pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. It mattered a great deal to me, and I've said this before, but so apologies for those who've heard it. But for me, part of the agreement that we make with our students when they come in and join our secondary academies, particularly in year 7, and we say to them, look, believe in yourselves, believe in your potential, aspire, but then work really hard. We'll provide the teaching, you work really hard, and you can achieve your potential and you can get to your goals. But if we face a situation where people can get in but can't get on because of where they're from, I'm breaking that promise. And so it really matters personally to me that we should be doing something on this agenda, making sure that talented individuals can thrive on their own merit, regardless of their backgrounds. Really critical. I mean, this is not only the right thing to do, it's absolutely crucial, I would say, for the continued success and competitiveness of the UK financial and professional services sector. We can't afford to value polish over performance. We can't afford to cut off progression with class ceilings. And I do think that to tackle this, we need whole system collaboration from government, from sector bodies, from regulators, and from employers. And today's launch of this toolkit is a really important part of this, supporting employers to take action. And I've been reading through some of the really practical suggestions that are in this, and a really excellent initiative. Now, we'll be taking our own steps to add to the work in this area. We'll be leading a new independent task force to boost socio-economic diversity at senior levels in UK financial and professional services. It's been commissioned by the Treasury and by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and it will bring together key stakeholders from across subsectors, regions and backgrounds. And I'm very I'm delighted to be chairing the task force alongside Sandra, who will be chairing one of the work streams, Andy Haldane, Chief Economist at the Bank of England, who will be chairing another, and Vincent Keaveney, Alderman from the City of London, who will be on the panel later on. And our vision is for equity of progression, where high performance is valued over fit and over polish. And we'll be looking at three key outputs. First of all, an industry consultation and roadmap on how government, regulators and the sector bodies can incentivise employer action. And Sandra will be chairing that piece of work, just showing how we're trying to fit this, trying to add to the work that others are doing and fit this into a cohesive spectrum. And secondly, we'll be looking at developing a membership body or peer network for financial services, rather like Access Accountancy, which the accountants have already set up, or Prime for the legal sector, but with a focus on progression and a focus on the financial services sector. And that is what Vincent will be leading. And it'll provide a safe space for financial services employers to share best practice and to benchmark against sector peers. And finally, we'll have a productivity analysis chaired by Andy Haldane to build the business case for socio-economic diversity at senior levels. We're very lucky to be supported by 3 delivery partners, Deloitte, My Kind of Future and PwC. We're currently recruiting 30 senior leaders to join our task force from across financial and professional services and the voluntary sector. But I want to be very clear, this is not going to be a talking shop for CEOs. We need action-orientated influencers. We need leaders who can drive change within their own organisation and beyond, because this is such a critical agenda that we need to make progress on. So the initial deadline for submitting expressions of interest is drawing very close, the 14th of December, not quite as close as the current deadline for the Brexit talks, I think, but that keeps moving. This won't. So do please get in touch if you want to know more. We will put the email in the chat box too, because really, let me just finish by saying that promoting greater diversity and inclusion, it really must be a priority for the sector. We've undoubtedly seen significant progress, but as you are just about to hear, our recent research highlights the scale of the challenge we still face. So I'm very pleased now to hand over to Nick Miller, CEO of the Bridge Group, the authors of the research, to tell you more about our key findings and recommendations. Thanks, everybody. Nick.
Thank you, Catherine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine, and thanks, Sandra, for the opportunity to spend a bit of time with people, and wonderful as ever to hear Justine speaking. So I'm delighted just to spend 5 or 10 minutes now just briefly summarising the research that was published on the 24th of November in partnership with the City of London. I've posted a link in the chat box to the full report, so this will be a whistle-stop tour, but much more detail available there. This report is focused on financial services, but definitely exemplifies the rationale behind the production of the toolkit that's being launched this morning. It also fits within a wider range of reports that have been published recently by the Bridge Group in, for example, accountancy, law and real estate. So as the slide shows, there were 8 organisations involved, 3 regulators, 5 financial services firms, and 3 aspects to the research. One, a review of context and existing practice. And as Sandra mentioned earlier, one of the key findings there is a welcome but really disproportionate focus on access to the professions as opposed to a focus on progression, who gets on and indeed how. We received just under 8,000 anonymous survey responses from employees across the organisations, looking at socioeconomic background as defined at the bottom left in the slide here, seniority and occupational area, and for the first time that we're aware of, looking across a range of organisations at rates of progression and pay data. And while the data illuminated what was happening at these organisations, the interviews gave us insights into why that should be and indeed what should be done. A third of those interviews were with some of the most senior people at these organisations. And just as I launch into what we found on the next slide, just to preface this by saying we don't extrapolate the findings from this study and apply them across the sector. Clearly 8 organisations have been involved, not the whole sector. However, the evidence here, as you'll hear, builds on earlier research and is already stimulating action amongst those organisations that participated and should challenge and inspire others to do the same, just as Justine was describing. So Lindsay, our next slide, what did we find? So firstly, looking at the diversity data, and again, I'll skip through these pretty quickly, but I would recommend you take a look at the longer report if you have time to do so. In aggregate, respondents across all the firms are unrepresentative by socioeconomic background. You can see here using the parental occupation indicator that just over half, 51% of respondents were from a higher socioeconomic background, compared with a third of the UK workforce. And there are various benchmarks here available to make sense of this data drawn from the labour force survey and from other studies that we've undertaken and others. The next slide shows that naturally this data varies by organisation. And there are a variety of factors that affect this. So A to G are the anonymised participants in this research. And there are a variety of factors affecting these data. So the percentage you see here is the percentage of survey respondents from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of the factors include geography, as Justine referenced. Some of the organisations have a bigger or smaller footprint in the city and outside of it. The composition of the organisation by occupational type, whether the dominant occupational area is retail banking or investment banking, for example, but a variety of other factors too, which I'll come to in a second. And really importantly, as we see on the next slide, while a lot of effort is taking place to diversify entry-level access to the sector, socioeconomic diversity appears to be lacking even at junior levels. And you can see in the bars here, we switched to the school type indicator, where we see the difference in percentages between junior and senior employees is not particularly marked. And again, there are benchmarks here, and you can see that the senior colleagues who responded to these surveys, their socioeconomic background demographic is comparable to, for example, that of MPs and BBC senior executives. Importantly, and this hasn't come up yet in any substantial way, but I hope it will in the Q&A, lots of the various diversity characteristics we looked at, including gender and ethnic group, combine to create multiple layers of inequality. This intersectionality is critical to understand. For example, white employees are almost twice as likely to have attended an independent school compared to those who identify as having Black heritage. So a clear finding from the research is that boosting socioeconomic diversity at junior levels will not automatically lead to greater diversity at the top. And as we flick to the next slide, this finding echoes our research in the legal sector, that employees from lower socioeconomic backgrounds take longer to progress through grades, what we call the progression gap. So in this research, we found the progression gap was about 25%. Those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds took on average 25% longer to progress through grades compared to their more affluent peers. This gap, when we also consider race, increases to about 32% when considering those who also identify as being from Black heritage. Interestingly, this progression gap, though, cannot be explained here by differential levels of performance. This contrasts with previous research we've published, as Sandra kindly referenced earlier, where in law, for example, at 7 city law firms, those graduate trainees from lower socioeconomic backgrounds were 75% more likely to feature in the top decile of performers. So in the interviews, it was typically recognised that socioeconomic background may have an impact on progression. The data suggests it definitely does, but that they characterise this often as a secondary effect, as opposed to direct discrimination. Interviewees often identified that the attributes required to get ahead, including visibility, polish, self-promotion, having social and cultural connections with colleagues and clients, are often A, not related to job performance, and B, are not neutral in relation to background. These things are often more available to those from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Interviewees did not portray themselves as victims. They certainly had agency in our conversations with them, but they did describe efforts to fit into dominant cultures, typically distracting from job performance, and often described them as exhausting, having to overperform or work harder compared to their peers from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, wasting time and energy assimilating to dominant cultures, with obvious knock-on effects to productivity. Importantly, and my final point before I conclude, colleagues, just by talking briefly about the recommendations, we found a really insightful contradiction in views about how client demands are advancing or working against diversity and inclusion. And here is where I think there's real value in looking across professional services, understanding shared issues, but also the way in which the dependencies of different professional sectors can work for or against these areas. So we heard, for example, how clients are increasingly requesting more diverse teams, typically with consideration to gender and ethnic group, but also sensitivity about how clients expect to meet the right people. That was often connected to socioeconomic background, much more than it was to gender or ethnicity. And then finally, where change happens, it was often felt that very senior leaders spoke authentically about inclusion, including socioeconomic background, and lived these values. But it was often middle managers, those managing talent and whose daily interactions with colleagues sets the dominant tone and culture, who most needed engaging. And furthermore, rather than focusing mainly on supporting minority groups to fit in, investing more in engaging and enlightening the majority group, usually, but not always white men, would have a greater impact on making change happen and challenging dominant cultures. With respect to the recommendations, I encourage you to take a look through them. I won't talk about them in detail because they've come up in some detail already. The cross-sector collaboration piece, I think Catherine touched upon perfectly. There are great examples of this within professional services. The importance of data, and we've celebrated the Social Mobility Commission's publication of the data toolkit just last week. And then my final point is this issue of fixing processes, not people, which echoes one of the findings from our interviews. Is the task at hand here to support people into roles and help them fit in, or to challenge dominant cultures, putting a premium on traits such as polish, self-promotion, or socially exclusive relationships will naturally penalise certain groups and have effects both on equality and also on productivity. And my strong view, as colleagues have already described this morning, is that the toolkit really advances lots of these recommendations in very practical ways. Back to you, Sandra, and I'm looking forward very much to hearing from Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And can I just say, another excellent piece of work in your long, over 15 years in advancing this agenda. So I'm very grateful for the support you've given us and for this research. And I really would highly recommend everybody go through it and some of the recommendations particularly. So thanks, Nick. And yes, I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Atkinson, CEO of the Social Mobility Foundation, Chief Executive from January 2020, and has led the work really to support and advocate for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds for a significant period, and particularly through this pandemic. So I would really encourage everyone to, again, listen closely, and thanks again for the index that you've just put into the chat room box as well. So handing over to Sarah. Can I just, before Sarah kicks off, sorry, Sarah, just encourage you to start putting questions in the chat for the panel, which will follow directly after Sarah has spoken, and Nina, my colleague, will take over to chair that panel. So thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Nick. I'm conscious that I'm the last speaker before those questions and that panel discussion. So like Nick, I've put the report I'm going to talk about in the chat. I will try and make this a whistle-stop tour and hope that we can draw some things out in the Q&A and the questions. So Lindsay, if you can move me through, that's brilliant. So I'm Sarah, I'm Chief Executive of the Social Mobility Foundation. We're a charity that aims to make a practical difference to social mobility and opportunities for young people, and as well as student programs, campaigns and advocacy. One of our flagship pieces of work and contributions to this debate is the Social Mobility Employer Index. Next slide, thanks Lindsay. The index it ranks and benchmarks employers in the UK on the efforts they're making to improve social mobility. Although employers are incredibly proud to be in the index, it's an audit, not an award. Organisations get a feedback report and we share the key findings. That's the report I dropped into the chat. And you can see the top 75 who we publish in this list, PwC at the top of the tree. These are the top 75 from 119 employers across 17 sectors, collectively employing just under 1 million people. So that's the data set that we're drawing from. In terms of the sectors that we're talking about particularly today, 30% of the entrants, 36% of the top 75 come from the law profession and sector. 18% of financial services entrants, 13% of that top 75, and professional services makes up 8% of the entrants, 7% of that top 75, including some of those top 10 performers. If we go, Lindsay, to the next piece. These are the 7 sections, key areas across which we ask employers questions. We ask about 100 questions across these key areas. I am not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to highlight a few key themes and cover some points particularly for the sectors today. I think it's one important thing just to say is not every organisation scores marks for every question. So if an employer doesn't have formal graduate recruitment programs, we don't rank them on that. Organisations are ranked on the percentage of available marks they've achieved. So we look at what you are able to do and what your effort is, not at benchmarking you against a sort of objective standard for every employer. So that bringing out those key themes. In terms of work with young people, this year it's been good to see that employers are continuing to target social mobility cold spots. Previous speakers have talked about the importance of place and the impact of geography. But that employment has slowed a little bit this year, perhaps as organisations are responding quickly to COVID-19. Might be some questions about that later. When it comes to work with young people and outreach, we are still not seeing, this is the 4th year that we've run the index, the link that we would like to see between employers' outreach into the community with young people and their recruitment pipeline. There's a wasted opportunity here. And also when it comes to opportunities for young people to progress, if there isn't a connection, we worry about that. When it comes to the routes in and attraction, great to see continued increase in higher level apprenticeships. And as is mentioned in the toolkit, a progression plan for employees to progress through the apprenticeship levels is a really important part of that social mobility journey. We're also seeing a shift in university visits and engagements. That's a big change since we started collecting this data. Non-Russell Group universities now visited almost equally to Russell Group. But I will talk a bit later about, particularly when it comes to the law sector, how we're seeing that impact in terms of recruitment and appointments. Next slide, please, Lindsay. And when we come to recruitment and selection, so nearly half of the employers who are entering the index are now analysing their recruitment processes to understand at what point people from low socioeconomic background may not be making it through, being able to identify those barriers and really look hard at change that might be needed to be made. And there are some good case studies in the Insight report about those recruitment processes among different employers. Increasingly, we're seeing employers analysing and challenging themselves on their own definitions of talent, trying to judge potential and not past performance or superficial polish. but we'd like to see that increased. And again, there's an element here for this sector particularly to look at understanding that. We've already highlighted the importance of data collection and analysis. We're seeing more organisations collecting parental occupation data, more organisations presenting their data to board level, really senior leadership looking at their own performance and their own data. We'd like to see more organisations publishing their data and sharing with each other and sharing publicly with their stakeholders their data and completion rates. Worryingly, completion rates have been falling since 2018. So the trust of employees to share their information with you, which is a critical measure, and we're not seeing that head in the right direction. Next slide, if we can, please, Lindsay. This slide highlights This slide highlights the presenting of data at background level, and you can see the differences there across those three most commonly asked questions for new entrants and the improvement there. That's something that's talked about in the toolkit and is really good to see. So next slide, please, Lindsay. When it comes to progression and experienced hires, this remains the lowest scoring section of the index, even for those employers that are really progressing through their social mobility journey. This is a challenge. We are seeing a positive trend when it comes to mentoring and buddy support for progression, informal sponsorship and support through the organisation. Justine Greening talks, I think, powerfully about the importance of advocacy and leadership when it comes to this sphere. More organisations are organising social mobility weeks, sharing social mobility stories. Organisations are recognising that their clients care about socioeconomic background and are engaging in this story. And nearly 3/4 of the entrants have got someone at board level who is accountable for their firm's performance when it comes to social mobility. So that's really pleasing to see, although it's not necessarily translating into data being closely monitored. Lindsay, you can click through the next slide very quickly, which just highlights some of that data, and on to the next one. Strengths and inconsistencies across financial and professional services and law, the sectors we're talking about today. There are some signature strengths here. Really good representation, of course, across the index. We've got a real wealth of data, case studies and stories to be shared. So if your firm is not in the index and you'd like to learn some insight, there is a lot to be gained from your sector, from our insight. And law and professional services have got higher than average completion rate for socioeconomic background questions. That's a good sign about employee participation and confidence. They're also more likely to be setting social mobility targets than other employers, but less likely to be encouraging the supply chain to take action. So there's an opportunity there. Some inconsistencies, I said I would talk about that Russell Group stat. So you saw the good news that more organisations are visiting non-Russell Group universities. But I'm afraid when it comes to the law sector, we've got the shocking statistic from this year's index that 84% of hires among law firms are from Russell Group universities. So when it comes to parity of hiring, there's a real gap there. I think it would be, it's crucial to look at that and really challenge ourselves on whether we can improve that. Law firms are strongest in data collection and data reviewed at board level, but for financial and professional services firms in our index, they are below the index average. Financial services is particularly low. So again, there's a key action point there. Next slide. Thank you, Lindsay, because we've pulled out just very briefly some priorities for 2021. So for every employer, particularly in the light of COVID-19, there are some key things to think about when it comes to access to technology, ensuring that opportunity for those from lower socioeconomic background isn't hampered by some of those practical challenges about digital connectivity and access to equipment. Using online attraction as an opportunity to widen reach, seeing that opportunity and really driving it forward, as well as accelerating action when it comes to contextual recruitment. The unpredictability of A-levels, hires, BTECs in this year's summer performance and in next year's means that contextual recruitment is really critical to get to grips with right now. And then we've talked already about data completion and data collection. For the sectors that we're highlighting today, we would there is good work being done here. There is good practice to share. Please share it with your clients, with your supply chain, and with others in your sector who are not as far along as you are, getting them to take part in the index and auditing their work. Take a good look at your university outreach to understand the backgrounds of those engaging with your organisation, and law professions, please broaden your university outreach and look at your recruitment processes to see why that isn't delivering the way we'd want it to. And for financial services, because you're lagging behind on data collection, we'd like you to see you drive that forward and target it. I'll finish there because the last slide is just about joining the index for 2021 and the opportunity to do that. I know we've got many index participants on the call today, so I will close there and hand back to Sandra so that we can move into Q&A.
Hi Sarah, thank you. Sandra's unfortunately had to move back to a board meeting, so it's myself. So thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. Unfortunately, again, due to timing, Nick from the Bridge Group has also had to leave us, but I'm pleased to say that we are welcoming Alderman Vincent Kearney to the panel, and Sarah. So actually, given the time we have, but I'm still keen to hear from you. We're about to go into some roundtable discussions across the sector, really so we can take from what we've heard today across all the speakers and from the toolkit and start to drive some intentions for 2021. So Vincent, if I may throw a question to yourself, and really I suppose this is something for us then to take forward in the discussion. So what would you say is maybe one or two key things that you think businesses in this sector really need to tackle to help drive that socio-economic diversity in 2021?
Thank you. I think there's probably, I'd mention just three things, although probably I'll spend a great deal of time on one of them. And Nick picked this up early on, cultures, you know, the dominant culture thing, this concept of cultures of networks. I think leadership is the other key thing, and of course, data. Now, with the importance of data is absolutely fundamental. We've talked about that already during the session, so I won't spend time on it. But the really interesting one for me, I think, is the question of cultures, and it's both internal and external. And I think we've talked a little bit about how you shape that internal culture, and we need to think about that too. But certainly from a professional services background, and I spent I'm indeed one of Sandra's partners at DLA Piper, so we share that in common as well. But the external aspect of this is really important, because so much of what professional services, financial services do relates to their clients. And I think what we need to see is really honest, open conversation between firms like mine and our clients about the way we interact and the culture that creates for the members of our respective teams. And leadership is a big part of this as well. The conversations that leadership create, cascade of tone through the organization. Because if it's not breaking through to the middle management and to across the shop floor, as it were, it's not going to land. So those will be the points I draw out to start the discussion.
Brilliant, thank you, Vincent. And Sarah, I'd be keen to see if there's been any changes this year given the impact. So I guess what I wanted to ask you, and again for us to take forward into our discussions, is obviously when people have been submitting their results this year, I realised it was really at the start of when the pandemic, so there might not have been many interventions come forward. But have you seen any new types of interventions that have really been impacted or led because of COVID-19, and how organisations have had to change things?
That's right, Nina. So this data set is at the start of COVID, but through our engagement with employers and the programme work that we've done at SMF, we have absolutely seen some opportunities from the difficulties of the pandemic. I mean, the first is about really, because so many things are having to be rethought in terms of recruitment processes, engagement with young people, those opportunities, there's the chance to make more powerful change in process because you are building a new process anyway. So in a way, the sort of the stickiness of we have a process, it's difficult to change it. that's up in the air anyway. So the opportunity to build in social mobility and socio-economic background into your new process is one that a lot of employers are engaging with. There are the obvious things like the fact that the opportunity to engage online, whether that's in outreach or recruitment, means that the barriers of place, distance, cost of access to interviews or to visits, should be less of an issue. We've certainly seen in our programme the ability to engage with students and give them a parity of experience wherever they are in the country has been something really powerful and positive. The challenges, I think, certainly that we've seen, the risks, one is about that superficial polish, which when it comes to online recruitment or engagement can be even more enticing. A student who has a great connectivity and who's got great presence when it comes to an online engagement may seem more impressive than a student who is who's nervy about his or her Wi-Fi and struggling to feel confident online. But actually that may be no sign whatsoever about talent. That may be a background issue. So I think with the positive opportunities of online, I would want to flag that caveat, not to be misled by superficial polish online, which can be very tempting.
And could I just mention as well, just on again, if you're looking for positives out of the pandemic, and we have to try and look for them where we can. Again, talking about how professional services firms connect with clients, I think there is again going to be changes coming out of this in terms of the way we entertain, the way we relate to clients outside work. Absolutely, there's going to be big changes. And I think it's an opportunity to look at what we've been doing in the past and actually see what we can do better.
Thank you both. Thank you. And I'm sorry we're having to cut it short, but I'm hoping that you might be able to at least stay in some of the room discussions for a few moments. So initially, let me just thank all of our speakers for today. I know we've had a great selection of individuals across the social mobility sector, so thank you to all of you. Now, what our intention is now that you will then go into the rooms, the breakout sessions, where one of my colleagues from the Social Mobility Commission will chat with sector representatives, really so we can start to drive those actions and intentions that you as practitioners can then start to take into 2021. So my esteemed colleague who is now going to press the automatic button, please do so, and we can go into our breakout rooms now. Thank you, everybody.